When the power died, the door unlatched. Not a click. A slow exhale of steel giving up a habit. The maglock lost its bite, and the slab of a door loosened just enough for fingers to find an edge. Diesel vapor flattened against the concrete ceiling and then drifted as the generator choked and went silent. For a breath, the building seemed to listen for itself. Hours earlier, 12 riders had rolled out for a Thanksgiving charity run. Cans and saddlebags, thermoses of burnt coffee and top boxes, breath smoking in the cold. The roads were leaf-slick and honest. They stopped at 2 drop points without incident, told the same lies about miles and weather, and counted helmets. 11. Not 12. Eddie knows the route, someone said. Eddie always did. He was the stubborn kind of reliable. A wrench for friends, a shoulder for the broken, and a magnet for shortcuts. He rode an old Sportster that complained like a man twice its age and still did the job anyway. At the 3rd stop, his place in the line was still air. Calls went to voicemail. A text marked "Delivered" stayed unanswered. The group fanned out along the route, scanning ditches and culverts, scanning that special distance riders learn to fear, the 20 feet where something can change a life and no one sees it happen. One rider, older jacket, quiet eyes, doubled back to the old county relief depot on County 8. It had been painted at some point by a man with more roller than paint, and the name stuck in spray stencil on the chain link Shelter 12. Once, it staged cots and water for storms. Now it was a good place for teenagers to dare each other and for weeds to study gates. In the blue light of late afternoon, the place looked half awake. The chain had been twisted off the gate with a tool that wasn't precision so much as patience. A single bulb burned over a roll-up door and quivered in the wind. Inside, a tone he could feel in his teeth. Generator hum with a belt squeal somewhere in the loop, ran like a thought that didn't want to be alone. He thumbed his engine off and let the quiet pile up. "Eddie," he called, and heard his own voice return wrong, the way a big room teaches a mouth new shapes. He rolled the bike into the bay and set the front wheel against a pallet. He wanted a straight-line exit and options under his feet. The concrete was colder by 10 degrees, marked in dust with shoe prints and a long heel drag that said the person who made it didn't love the direction they were going. The roll-up came down behind him with the finality of a dropped book. Fluorescence flickered on in a line down a fake corridor that hadn't been there an hour ago. Plywood walls on sliders, corners that controlled a body's speed. Somewhere above, a relay clicked and a cheap intercom chirped. "Welcome to Shelter 12, a voice said. The tone was neighborly and wrong. "Phones in the bin." "This is a drill." A plastic tote on a chair held a blinking tea light like a joke told often. He didn't break stride. Another chirp, more pleasant. "Phones in the bin, partner." The corridor narrowed, then opened into a break area that had been emptied of kindness. Vending machine glass starred white, a scratched table shoved against a wall, zip ties on the floor like confetti a week late for a parade. Cameras, little black eyes with that wet look lenses get when someone wipes them every day, nested in corners. In the ceiling, sprinkler heads watched like suspicious cousins. "Drill begins in 60 seconds, the intercom said. "Assess. Secure. Extract." A timer appeared on a wall-mounted screen, counting down in a font used by people who think fonts can make a person calm. The air tasted peppery. The first target popped up. A mannequin's torso in a hoodie with a paper plate taped where a heart should be, springing to life on a warped steel leg. Its chest was pocked with little circles of paint that had stained the plywood behind into constellations. The rider lifted a hand against the pepper bite building behind his eyes and kept moving. The plywood maze shaped choices, right, left, straight into a blind corner with a strobe painted into the drywall. A tripwire an inch off the floor did its best to be generous. He stepped over it and listened for the kind of click that makes regret. None came. He kept to the wall and found the first maglocked door. The bar hummed contentedly, locked by habit and voltage. The little panel said, "Ready" in cheerful green, which meant whatever logic controlled it had been told a story, not the truth. Mag locks don't negotiate. They prefer famine to argument. Somewhere in the building, a cabinet was feeding this habit with uninterrupted power. The intercom cleared its throat. 10 seconds. He found the conduit, a gray vein running from the door up into the ceiling and across into a caged breaker cabinet labeled in a hand that liked capital letters too much. The padlock on the cage was cheap. The screws on the hasp weren't. On the floor, a fire extinguisher dozed under a workbench. He slid it free, braced its neck under the hasp, and leaned his weight until steel complained. The screws began to walk. The timer hit 0. Go! Alarms detonated in a pattern a committee must have tested on animals. Short shrieks, then a bass note that found bones. Strobe popped, burned the maze into still photos that refused to line up. A new target lunged. He let it take his shoulder and used the recoil to carry him forward. Down the next hall, a scuff mark at knee height, fresh paint shaved off by a boot toe, pointed into a narrow office. On the floor, Eddie, hands cinched in front with a plastic tie looped so tight the blood had lodged in his knuckles. Jacket half off like someone had tried to sell a story and didn't finish it. A walnut-sized knot rose on his forehead, purple, eating the edges. "Don't touch the doors," Eddie hissed, voice dry as a battery. "He's watching." The cameras were watching. The voice belonged to someone newer than the building, newer than the project that had once measured cots and counted pallets. A different man had measured these corners and painted these lines, and he cared about an audience. "Threat relocated," the intercom announced. "Scenario continues." The rider wedged the extinguisher's handle under the tie and levered. Plastic whined, stretched, and split with a sound like a bad decision becoming a memory. Eddie sucked a breath and tried his legs. One buckled, then decided to negotiate. "What did you touch?" the rider asked. "The keypad. He likes it when you touch things." "Where's the generator?" Eddie rolled his eyes toward the ceiling, past the wiring and ductwork. "Far bay. Cage. He ran a belt wrong. Makes a squeal on the quarter." The building coughed a squeal right on cue. The rider raised the extinguisher like a club and they moved. A two-person shape that had learned each other's steps in 100 gas station exits. The alarms cycled back to the bass note. He counted beats and used the quiet between ideas to cover distance. The far bay was scripted to feel like an outside world, a line painted across the floor as if to suggest a street, a false door with exit spray-painted and then stenciled, as if one person had corrected another. A chain-link cage with a padlock that looked proud of its chin. Inside the cage, the generator burred, shivered, and hunted. The belts squealed on the quarter like Eddie had said. Beyond the cage, a figure paced just out of the LED wash. Ear protection, chalk gray ball cap, the build of a man who used to train people to break down doors and had not been invited to keep doing so. He carried a launcher with the casual grip of someone who didn't mind pain as long as it didn't belong to him. The intercom softened. "Participants have entered extraction zone." The rider put Eddie behind a pallet stack and stepped into view. The man in the cap turned like a happy dog hearing his name. "Partner," he called, "you skipped the phone bin." A pepper ball cracked against the wall. The powder bloomed and rode the air into the sinuses like insult. "Non-compliance," the intercom said brightly. "Escalate." Another shot. The rider stayed low and to the right, where the shadow from a forklift mast made a pocket. He lifted the extinguisher, thumbed the pin, and took a breath he didn't intend to keep. When the man shifted weight for a third shot, the rider popped around the mast and squeezed the handle. The world went white and hissing. CO2 drove a cold cloud across bay and cage. The man flinched, not because he was a coward, but because eyes are laws unto themselves. He fired 2 blind pepper rounds into the cloud. The powder found its own fog and got confused. The rider moved into the lane the cloud made. The extinguisher's base rang off the launcher's barrel. The man's grip broke. A knee found a thigh and took it out of the conversation. The rider shoved the man into the cage door. The mesh sang. The padlock held. The man grabbed for the rider's jacket and got a handful of zipper. The rider let the jacket go and hit the man again with the extinguisher, low and ugly across the forearm, something to make fingers forget loyalty. The launcher clattered and slid under a pallet. From the corner of his eye, Eddie, half up, eyes wet but clear, pointing at the breaker. The rider followed the line of the finger and saw the main switch for the cage, the one that fed the mag locks and the nice green lies. He hit it with the extinguisher's neck like it owed him rent. The handle snapped to off. The building sighed. The mag bars across the bay thudded as they unlatched in a chain reaction, a metallic heartbeat rolling back through the maze. Lights bucked. The generator choked. The rider shoved the man in the cap down and zip-tied his wrists with the same brand of plastic that had chewed Eddie. The man thrashed once, surprised, then tried to rhyme his breath with pain. It didn't scan. In the dark, between pulses of emergency lighting, the intercom's cheer faltered. "Scenario paused," it announced, and then, because recordings can't do shame, it repeated itself. Scenario paused. The rider got Eddie under the arm and moved. The roll-up door at the bay had a manual chain. He pulled until his teeth felt warm. The door came up slow, complaining, a few inches at a time, and then found its groove. Night air poured in and made the maze smell like what it used to be. Dust, cardboard, old paint, and the hint of rain decided against. Outside, the county had decided to care. 2 patrol cars angled into the drive, lights squalling on the tin siding. A ranger unit took the shoulder and pinned it. Radios arrived before the officers did. Shouted questions, stepped on answers, and then learned to take turns. They found the man in the cage, ex-military contractor. A resume that was very proud until it wasn't. The cameras had been streaming to a private group that liked to watch scenarios where people learned lessons. The lessons had been priced per seat. The list of paying viewers was a spreadsheet with a tab for referral codes. Eddie sat on a pallet and let a paramedic shine a light into the world's biggest bruise. His wrists were raw where the tie had tried to make a point. He kept turning his hands like he'd lost something and wanted to catch the moment of the loss on the way by. "Shortcut?" he said finally, voice vague and ashamed. "Don't say it like that," the rider told him. "Say you saw a light where there shouldn't have been one." Eddie grunted, something like a laugh that had been filed down to a cough. He looked past the paramedic to the cage. "He said it was a training night. He said I'd get a discount if I played the bad guy and didn't mind getting roughed up a little." "Discount for what?" "Security package," Eddie said, as if the words were a language the mouth did not want to learn. Inside, officers traced wires, flipped switches now made honest, and wrote down labels someone had photocopied and laminated like a craft project. The building's power cleaned its throat and decided to behave. A printer on a desk in the office spat out a page as if to remind someone it had not broken. The page read, "Drill root" in black marker, smudged with grease fingerprints that looked almost like signatures. A sergeant walked over to the pallet and nodded to Eddie. "You the one who made the call?" "Wasn't me," Eddie said, touching the knot on his head like he'd set it there on purpose. "I didn't have a phone for a while." The sergeant looked to the rider. "Wasn't him either," the rider said. "The building did it when the power dropped. The alarm company thought somebody died." "They weren't far wrong," the sergeant muttered, and then softer. "You both want to give statements?" They did, the way you do when a story will be told with or without your help. The night grew a skin of frost and then thought better of it. The charity ride finished without them and then circled back like dogs who want to count noses. Someone brought coffee in paper cups that wore lids too tight. Someone else brought a laugh that fit around silence without breaking it. In the far bay, An officer unrolled a sheet of vinyl the contractor had been using as a backdrop. It showed a wholesome living room with a couch no one would ever sit on. The cameras were angled to film a hero entering a room like that and teaching it manners. The script on the desk imagined a woman at home alone, a shadow at the window, and a man with a training manual arriving to sell certainty. The audience would have loved it if the evening had not instead featured a generator belt, pepper balls, and the fact that people do not stay where you put them if they have friends. By dawn, the frost had decided to stay. The depot looked smaller and more honest in gray light. The wind set the unlatched door to tapping, the way doors will when they remember they were once trees. The tape lines on the floor, the targets on springs, the laminated labels, everything that had pretended to be important, looked like a yard sale no one would stop for. Eddie's Sportster coughed once and agreed to leave. The rider followed it into a morning that hadn't decided what kind of day it would be. At the end of the county road, the group waited in a ragged line, their breath a string of lightly smoking commas. They counted helmets out of habit. 12. No one said the word shortcut. No one said drill. Someone said coffee, with the weight it deserves. They rode toward steam and human voices and the kind of ordinary that doesn't need to be explained. Back at Shelter 12, the door the building had unlatched stood open to a hinge's width. It would be boarded by noon, paper would be signed, a live stream would be scrubbed, a spreadsheet would meet detectives with better questions than passwords. The room would forget the shapes that had moved through it and remember only angles. The hum was gone. Power off. Door unlocked. The air still tasted faintly of pepper and cold metal. An afterimage the tongue would carry for half a day, and then, mercifully, drop. By evening, someone would joke that a drill happened and nothing learned from it stayed. But a few things did. A belt on a generator squealed every quarter turn because a man said it wrong and believed in the sound of his own plan. A mag lock let go when it starved. A door sighed like a habit breaking, and 12 riders left a place meant to trap strangers and went back to a town that has better uses for doors.